Hello, and welcome to On the Record Bay Area Police Chiefs. I'm Mike Mibach. Today, three chiefs, one table. The police chiefs of Hayward and San Jose will join me in just a bit. But first, we focus on July 28th of this year, the final day of the Gilroy Garlic Festival. A man walked onto the festival grounds and started shooting. 3 people were killed, 17 others injured. For the first time, right here in this studio, we sit down with the police chief of Gilroy, Scott Smithy. Chief, welcome and thank you.
Thank you.
Take me back to that day. Here we are, day 3 of the Garlic Festival. We're nearing closing time. Where are you, and when do you first hear about these shots being fired on the festival grounds?
Well, typically I spend all 3 days at the Garlic Festival, even in my capacity as chief or as a volunteer. Usually I split the day. On that Sunday, our alcohol sales closed down at 5 o'clock. Once the alcohol sales were closed down, people were starting to leave. It's the end of the final day. I checked in with our command post at the festival grounds. Everything was going as expected. And so I had left the grounds and went back to the station. And while I was gone is when I heard the first calls out over the radio that there was an active shooter at the Garlic Festival.
And then you do what?
Well, I think for the first few seconds, you almost wonder if you really heard that right. You know, it was a little bit shocking. And so I immediately started responding back into the festival grounds. That takes a few minutes to get through all the barricades and all the stop points, but I was able to get back into the command post. And as I pulled into that command post, it was pretty much chaos was ensuing.
And when you say chaos, describe that for me a little bit more. What do you mean chaos? What was there on?
Well, even though it was late on the last day of the Garlic Festival, there were still thousands and thousands of people there. And so when the shots rang out, those thousands of people started running, and they didn't stop running. So as I was coming in, the streets were filled with people running away from the venue. We even had people that were running down the creek that trampled right over the fence of the police compound trying to get into where we were, thinking that would be a safe place to be.
When you got on scene, were the shots done?
All the shooting was done by the time I got there.
Now, you had officers on scene.
Yes.
And you had officers there all weekend.
That's correct.
That's standard protocol.
Yes.
You had 3 officers? Is that?
Well, there were 3 officers directly involved in the shooting, but there were over 40 officers on the grounds at the time of the shooting.
Tell me what those officers within your department did when they heard shots being fired.
Well, the 3 officers that engaged the suspect, one of the 3 had some experience in the military and as a military contractor. And so when the shots were fired, he immediately knew what it was. I think a lot of people explained that they thought it was fireworks that were being set off initially. But that officer immediately took off running towards the sound of the gunfire because he immediately recognized what it was. And his 2 partners that were with him then started running after him to try to keep up.
When you got there on scene, did you go to the actual crime scene? Did you speak to the officers? Did you ever see where the shooter was?
I did not go to the actual crime scene. I went to the command post area at the festival, which is not very far away from the crime scene.
Yeah.
But, you know, now we've called for help because we were advised by multiple witnesses at the scene that there was a second shooter. And we did not know where that second shooter was or whether there was still a threat. And so we were starting to deploy a lot of resources to try to search for and identify a potential second shooter.
3 people, Stephen Romero, Kayla Salazar, and Trevor Irby lost their life. A 6-year-old, 13-year-old, and 25-year-old. Did you ever get a chance to visit with their families, or I should say families of any of those who were injured in this shooting?
Initially, no. I did see some of the family members at a memorial that was held later that week. Not all the families and family members were there, but it was a very emotional time.
You know, sometimes when I hear of a mass shooting and I'm in the newsroom, you know, I'm told by my boss, hey, we got to cut into programming, let's go, get a microphone on, and we do that, and I stand there and we talk about the events. And then another time we do it is when a police chief steps up to the bank of microphones and cuts in and is going to give us some information. We'll cut into programming, and we did that with you. And I'm curious, you know, as the leader of a police department, when you step up to that bank of cameras, all those microphones on a podium, and you look out, what's going through your mind? What's going through your emotions when you're standing there trying to do your job, but also knowing what had just occurred?
Well, I remember pulling up to the press conference, and I'd never seen so many cameras in my life. But I think the emotion of the situation was such that I didn't have time to really think about that or even get nervous about stepping in front of the cameras. I felt that, you know, my community needed to know what was going on, because virtually everybody that lives in the city of Gilroy probably knew somebody that was there volunteering, attending. And there were a lot of worried people. And so for me, it wasn't talking to the world through the press. I was trying to talk to my community to let them know what was going on and where we were at that moment.
You're so busy during those initial 24, 48 hours or beyond. Do you ever get a chance just to compress by yourself? And was there a moment when you kind of had that time and you realized what happened and kind of take care of your own self too?
I don't think the time for me to reflect or take care of myself happened for days after that initial event. Just the volume of tasks that needed to be done and the volume of staff from various agencies that needed to be coordinated really took all of my time for several days. And I would say it was probably 4 or 5 days into the event before I really had time to just sit and reflect about what had occurred.
Can you share a little bit of that reflection and what you thought about?
Well, I think the hardest thing is the victims, not just the people that were shot, but particularly the people that were killed. And because, you know, those are innocent people and 2 of them were children, and the effect that had on my staff that showed up to do the emergency medical aid. I think our police officers did a fantastic job. We've been told by emergency room personnel that they saved many lives by reacting very, very quickly to stop bleeding and get people help. But, you know, the young boy and the young girl and then the young man, they tried and tried to save their lives, and there was just nothing that they could do. And that's a very traumatic event for those officers. And so the emotional part for me was the emotion of the family, of the people that witnessed it, of the officers that tried to save their lives, and you could feel that emotion.
All right, Chief, stay with us right now. When we come back, Tony Chaplin, the new police chief of Hayward, and San Jose Police Chief Eddie Garcia will join in on this conversation, reaction to Chief Smithy's words. Also, other topics from policing large events to retaining officers, the homeless crisis, that and much more when Bay Area Police Chiefs on the Record returns. Welcome back. Joining our conversation now, San Jose Police Chief Eddie Garcia and the new police chief of Hayward, Tony Chaplin. Thank you both for coming in for this conversation. Let me just get your quick reaction to Chief Smithy's comments regarding the shooting in Gilroy. What did you hear from the chief that kind of stood out from you?
Well, it's still tough to hear. The emotions are still raw. Anytime there is an active shooter situation in any jurisdiction, as most chiefs will tell you, we all stay glued to the television set and we pay attention to every detail, every statement made, just because you don't know when it's going to fall or land in your backyard.
Chief Garcia.
It's something that could happen to any of us in any of our communities. You know, as you look back on that situation, you're just very proud, really, of the men and women of the Gilroy Police Department. Very proud of the way Chief Smithy and his department handled that, his response to the media afterwards. And then we're very fortunate and proud that we were able to assist and help our fellow agency as best we could.
You know, as leaders of police departments, you may lead your days saying, hey, I'm protecting the community. This is my city. That's my job as the chief of police. At any time, Chief, during that event or afterwards, did you feel you let the community down? I mean, ultimately, again, this is the gunman who fired, and that person's responsible. But as the leader of police departments, does that weigh on you a little bit?
Well, I think as a police chief, your job is the safety and security of your community, and you try to plan as best you can to prevent bad things from happening. Unfortunately, somebody that's bound and determined to cause harm is going to find a way to do that. And so I think we did a good job in our planning to prevent it. But when something happens, you're always second guessing yourself as to what else might we have done or could we have done differently that might have prevented this incident from occurring in the first place.
I mean, if you didn't have those officers on the grounds that day, we could be talking about a higher death toll.
Literally seconds more would have been a higher death toll. Every second that went by would have been more rounds being shot into a large crowd of people.
I think one witness described hearing the gunman, excuse me, on that day saying, I'm just angry, you know, but how do you stop anger? How do you prevent these mass shootings in the future? Chief Garcia?
Well, you know, one of the things that we have to be honest with ourselves about is that you can't prevent these from occurring. You can't be everywhere. But what you can hope to do is to mitigate the violence that occurs by ensuring that you put your officers in the best position to save lives when these things occur. We have seen, not just in Gilroy, but nationally, that the quicker officers get on scene, the more lives that are saved. And so looking at those, tactics have changed post-1999 Columbine, where no longer do we just sit and wait to go in. We need to go in and deal with the threat. And so finding different ways to put your officers in those positions to help mitigate is the name of the game.
Tips to police, you guys investigate right away, would you say, Chief?
Yeah, we do investigate right away, but to Eddie's point, if you engage these subjects in the high 90 percentile, they either commit suicide or the police neutralize the subject. So one of the big things that we're training our people to do, and I think every agency does this, is to engage immediately. The sooner we get involved, the sooner the rampage stops. As we've seen nationally, the sooner we get involved, the sooner these things stop. And it brings up the big issue that law enforcement faces now. On one side of the equation, we're teaching our people to slow down, de-escalate, create time and distance, but then we have these active shooter situations, and we have to shift into high gear and immediately engage the subject. So it's a heavy pull, it's a heavy lift. There's a lot of training involved. It's pretty intense, and we're having to teach our people how to shift gears from fifth all the way down to one in some cases.
What about the debate when it comes to banning certain guns, assault rifles? Chief, would that be a help, you think, in preventing these mass shootings?
Well, I think not having the kind of firepower that he has reduces the potential damage that can be done in a short period of time. I think it helps, but I think the issue is really bigger than that. Banning guns or banning certain types of things doesn't address more the root cause of the issue, which is the mental state of these people and why they think it's okay to do this or they're driven to do this.
What about you, chiefs? Banning guns, is that an answer to this?
I'll tell you, and especially on the record, I will tell you that I don't believe an assault rifle or an AR-15 should be in the hands of anybody but military or law enforcement. It was the whole purpose of the invention of that weaponry to begin with. And so I will say that lives are lost when it's an easier way to fire on them. But take a step back and tell you that we can't wait for legislation to fix this. And so we need to come up with ways to ensure that our officers are placed in the best positions to address these threats. In San Jose, we've put large events under an active shooter mitigation lens, where we assign officers that are just specifically there to address an active shooter. That's one thing that we did after, the recent events that had occurred. But it just really goes to say we can't wait for legislation to happen. We have to do something proactively. I think our community expects us that.
Chief Chaplain, what do you think?
Well, I'm in agreement with both gentlemen, left and right. I think it's a mental health issue, but I also think it's a capacity issue. It's difficult to shoot 30 people with a 6-shooter without reloading. And talking about having people on scene to engage these shooters, if they have that much of a round capacity, one of the recent shootings, they were within seconds of engaging that gunman, but he was still able to get off, I don't recall how many rounds, but he was able to shoot a lot of people in seconds. And that's because of the high capacity rounds or magazines and the high capacity weaponry that this person had at their disposal. So I think the answer lies somewhere in the middle with addressing the mental health issues, but also banning the assault rifles. I don't need to protect my home with a weapon that I can fire in my house and go through a couple of walls and hit my neighbor 1 or 2 houses down from me.
So the other day I went to watch the Blue Angels with my son and daughter over kind of by Fort Baker. just north of the Golden Gate. We're in Headlands. And we were sitting there in our lawn chairs, and here come a couple federal officers, long guns, like walking by. And the reaction of my son was like, wow, Dad, look at that long gun. That's a big gun. And I could hear the noise behind me saying, we don't need that. But part of me was like, I didn't mind it. And I told my son and my daughter, and I said, hey, you know what? They're here to protect us. Do you think bigger visibility, weapons out at major public events is appropriate moving forward in the days we're living in?
I think depending on the event. I'll tell you, at the end of the day, it's us three that are going to be standing in front of you, explaining what we did to keep our community safe on that day. And if by my officers or our officers carrying long guns saves lives, I really, truly can care less whose feelings that hurts, as long as we save lives and put my officers in a position to do that.
Yeah, real quick.
Well, I'll tell you, I was in Manhattan a couple of years ago, and I went to the 9/11 Memorial, and there were folks out there with long guns, and everyone, I asked the officers, they said people come up to them, shake their hands, and thank them for being there all the time. And when we hosted the Super Bowl, when I was in San Francisco, we had our long guns out, and I cannot tell you how many people not only were appreciative of it, but were posing with the officers, taking pictures with them, and they appreciate the fact that the long guns were on scene. And as we've seen in these mass shooting incidents, those long guns make a difference. And when they can be deployed immediately, you do not want to be trying to navigate through, as Chief Smithy said earlier, thousands of people fleeing a venue to try to get back to your car to get that long gun. You'll never make it.
You're okay with it, Chief, moving forward, seeing the long guns on officers?
Yeah, I think that you're going to see, I think that's going to be a change you'll see at venues across the country, frankly. We did not have them deployed at the Garlic Festival. A lot of it is public perception. But truly, it's a miracle that those three officers that engaged that gunman lived through it, because they were being fired at with an assault rifle, and they're trying to return fire with handguns. So, my perception is that in the future, that's going to become more normal. And as more people get accustomed to seeing that, I think it'll be less of an issue.
Still to come, Chief Chaplain on not getting the top spot in the city of San Francisco and his vision for the city of Hayward. Plus, the police chiefs dive into the homeless crisis, the impact on their departments, and how they can help. When On the Record, Bay Area Police Chiefs returns. Governor Newsom's been out there signing a lot of bills. He recently signed a law, one that will make California the first to allow employers, coworkers, and teachers to seek gun violence restraining orders against other people. I guess right now it's just family members and you guys, law enforcement, who can ask judges to take away guns. Should employers, coworkers, and teachers be allowed to do this? Do you like this law? Go ahead, Chief Chaplain.
I love it. I mean, we've been preaching forever that old mantra, see something, say something. And oftentimes, those are the first indicators that we have somebody on the verge of doing one of these heinous acts.
Yeah. What about you, Chief Smithy?
I completely agree with that. I think being in this business for a long time, you know sometimes that somebody's a danger, and that gives us another tool to try to mitigate that risk. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, that's two good things. You're a third, or no?
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Okay.
Wholeheartedly. We're in this together.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about Hayward, Chief Chaplain. You come from San Francisco. Before we get into your new job, and congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
Did you want to be the chief of San Francisco? When they hired Bill Scott, were you a little disappointed? Because you were the interim chief for, what, 6-7 months?
I was. I had a good run, but I was ready to turn over the reins. I was put in that position to kind of calm the waters and guide us to a better place. I think I got that accomplished. It's no secret my name was definitely in the hat, but I think the San Francisco Police Department made an excellent choice. And since 2017, Chief Scott's proven that every day.
Were you disappointed that you didn't get the job? I mean, your name was in the hat.
No, I think there's always a level of disappointment, but at the same time, sometimes, as the old saying goes, 3 stars are sometimes lighter than 4. So I was in the assistant chief position, so I still had a lot of decision-making abilities. Chief Scott put me in charge of operations, a big chunk of the department. So I was still able to get the job done, and now I'm sitting in Hayward in the top cop spot, so I'm enjoying myself.
Rumor is you're trying to recruit San Jose police officers. Are you putting up advertising in the city? Or is this true here, Chief?
Right next to headquarters.
No, we have not seen any Hayward billboards yet.
What about lateral moves? I mean, I just went to a high school reunion. I went to high school in San Francisco, and I'm friends with a couple of the officers who say it's just you can't be a cop in San Francisco anymore. Did you get a sense of that at all? That people are having a tough time and that people want to transfer out of San Francisco to other cities? And San Francisco's not here to represent itself. I understand that. But did you get a sense there are some officers who want it out?
Well, I think anytime you're in a big agency, you're going to deal with those issues because now we're finding more and more, kind of like the millennials, people are now getting to a place where the commute is becoming an issue. And if they live in the East Bay, and we have a lot of officers, or had a lot of officers when I was in San Francisco that lived in East Bay, and so they're looking to cut down their commute. And you know, the salary, bonuses, some of those things are out the window. People are now looking at the quality of life and you know, some of the stressors they may be enduring with the traffic issues. So you're seeing a lot of people reassessing where they are.
Chief Smithy, what about in your department? What do you tell your officers who say it's just hard to be a police officer these days because of all what we can and can't do compared to 20 or 30 years ago? Do you even get those complaints? And if so, what do you say as the leader?
Well, I think it's a little bit easier in a smaller agency and in a smaller community. I think that it is tough. There's a lot of challenges, whether it's law changes, requirements, the way media looks at law enforcement. But at the end of the day, we still have to go out there and do our job, and we exist to provide a service to our community. And so I think each of us just has to remind our folks, regardless of what the public opinion is or things that are going on externally, that we need to stay focused on our job, and that's going out there and taking care of our communities.
When it comes to the homeless crisis, how does this impact you guys at all? And we're doing a lot of stories about it. You know, when it comes to encampments, let's just pick that. These homeless encampments, you know, what's the direction you're getting from City Hall? One
of the things that I will tell you is the one thing we found in encampments is just there's a lot of drug use in our encampments. There's a lot of mental illness in our encampments. And oftentimes drug use and mental illness do lead to quality of life crimes and issues that has been plaguing our community. And trying to find ways to combat that portion of it, while at the same time showing empathy and trying to house our homeless individuals and get them help, is the balance.
Do police departments need to be more involved in this homeless crisis, you think, or yes or no, Chief Smithy?
Well, I think in our agency, we're very involved in it.
In what way?
Well, we have a lot of waterways. There's a lot of, debris and health issues that we need to address, and we do that a lot. In fact, we do it weekly. And I would agree with Chief Garcia. It's a balancing act. And some homeless people don't create a huge problem, but the ones that are the drug addicts or the mental health people, that's where we find ourselves spending a lot of our resources addressing.
What is the biggest challenge for officers today?
I think it is adapting to everything we've talked about, the current laws, the homeless issue. Laws are changing quickly under our feet. I've seen more change in the last half decade than I've seen in almost 30 years in law enforcement. And I think with the panel here today, we have almost 100 years sitting here at this table right now, and I don't think anybody would disagree with that. We've seen an enormous amount of change. So, you know, officers are having to adapt. Body cameras, de-escalation, mass shootings. I mean, just there's so much being thrown at them. And, you know, the training is moving at 1,000 miles per hour. And they're constantly being told, hey, listen, we're going to retrain you. We're going to show you how to do this now. We're going to show you how to do that. I think that's the biggest thing they have to adapt to is the constant change in the profession.
Thank you very much, guys, for the conversation, and congratulations on the job.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. For all of us here at KTVU Fox News, I'm Mike Mibach. Thanks for watching On the Record, Bay Area Police Chiefs.